Hi, I'm Tony. I spent my life building a family, a home, a legacy. Then one day, my daughter called and said, "You're not invited to the wedding." No warning, no reason, just gone. But what shattered me wasn't that call. It was what I found out afterward, about the lies, the signatures, the house I built with my bare hands. Why did they erase me? And what did I do next? The morning began the same as most others since I retired. I was up before the sun, barefoot in the kitchen, brewing a cup of coffee while the birds outside stirred in the trees. I always opened the back door to scatter a handful of seed, sparrows mostly, but sometimes a cardinal or two would show up. I had a rhythm here, a quiet kind of peace that made the world feel manageable. My morning ritual continued with me polishing the antique watch I'd worn for over 30 years, gifted by my wife before she passed. I'd adjusted to living alone, but I never really got used to the silence. Not truly. Still, I filled it with routine, with order, with memories. That day, I had a different kind of energy in my bones. My daughter, Emily, was getting married in 2 weeks. I'd already had my suit tailored, a charcoal gray with a subtle navy pinstripe. It was waiting in a garment bag near the hallway closet. I'd planned to leave a day early, stay in a nearby hotel, and be the first face she saw walking down the aisle. I'd rehearsed my speech in my head 100 times, what I'd say to her, how I'd hold her hand before giving her away. Being her father had become the most defining part of my life, especially after her mother passed. It was just us for years. That bond, at least in my mind, had never cracked. Not even once. I was pouring a second cup of coffee when the phone rang. I remember the exact sound, the way it broke through the room like an unexpected knock at the door. It was Emily. Her voice was tight, polite, measured, like she was reading from something. "Dad," she said, "I wanted to call you before you bought your plane ticket. I think it's better if you don't come to the wedding." I didn't answer right away. I thought I hadn't heard her right. I even glanced at the phone to see if the signal had dropped. "What?" was all I could manage. "It's just a lot of dynamics. We don't want drama. It's complicated," she said. "Complicated how?" I asked, though I already sensed the truth lurking just behind her words. She paused. A long, silent breath. "I just think this is better." And then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, holding the phone. The birds had gone quiet. The coffee had gone cold. My suit was still in the hallway, and I didn't move. I didn't curse. I didn't call her back. I just stood there. Something inside me sank like a stone. That evening, I got a message from an old friend, Mark, who used to live 2 streets over. He'd been invited to the rehearsal dinner. Attached to his text was a picture. In the photo, I saw Emily smiling, arm in arm with her stepfather. The caption read, "So proud of my little girl." And suddenly it all clicked. I wasn't just uninvited. I'd been replaced. It hit deeper than anything I'd felt in years. That man had come into Emily's life long after I had carried her through sleepless nights and broken hearts. I was the one who taught her to ride a bike, who stayed up assembling Christmas toys until 2 in the morning. I took her to school on her first day, tied her shoes before ballet recitals. But in that moment, he was the one beside her. I sat down and stared at the floor. My mind flicked back to years ago when her mother remarried. The man had always worn cologne too strong and a smile too wide. There was a silent tension between us, never spoken aloud, but it hung in the air every time we crossed paths. I had swallowed it for Emily's sake. Now it was as if my place had been quietly rewritten. I didn't cry. I didn't break anything. Instead, I put the kettle on. As the water heated, I sat at the small kitchen table watching the steam rise. I thought about the word dignity. I thought about what it meant when you've been shoved aside and you choose not to beg for a seat at the table. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. I'd heard that once in a movie, or maybe Maya Angelou said it. Either way, it stuck. I pulled on my coat and took a walk through the neighborhood. The sidewalks were cracked in places, but I knew every inch of them. I passed the bakery where Emily and I used to stop on Sundays. I passed the school she once attended. Memories had a way of sticking to places like dust. I could have called her back, could have demanded answers. But what would that change? If I'm not welcome, I whispered to myself, I won't force myself where I'm not wanted. That night, I sat in my living room and pulled out an old photo of her college graduation. We stood side by side, arms around each other, both smiling like we believed nothing could break us. The next morning was the wedding day. I watered the plants. I made coffee, I read the paper, I checked the clock, again and again. In my mind, I tried to imagine her in her wedding dress. I wondered if she looked like her mother that day. I wouldn't know. I never would. I opened my calendar on the fridge, stared at the red circle around today's date. Then I grabbed a magnet and slid it down, covering the square entirely. She got married today, somewhere, surrounded by people who thought it was okay I wasn't there. I muttered into the empty room, "You only get one father." And that night, I opened the safe. I moved slowly, like I was approaching something sacred or cursed. I couldn't tell which. The safe sat beneath the hallway cabinet, covered in dust and a faded towel I hadn't moved in years. The combination was still written in the corner of my old desk drawer. Same code since I bought the damn thing back in '93. My fingers hesitated on the dial. I turned it left, right, then back again. The familiar clicks, louder than I remembered. My hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Age does that. Or maybe it was just the weight of the moment. The lock finally gave with a quiet thud. Inside, the scent hit me first. Old paper, time, and maybe a little regret. It was like opening a box of who you used to be. I hadn't been in there since before Marla left for college. I kept it for important things, passports, insurance forms, a few mementos from my Navy days. But I knew there was more. I just didn't know how much more. I pulled out a few folders, a sealed envelope, and a stack of documents, trying not to rush. Somewhere deep down, I was hoping I'd find something that reminded me of when I still mattered. And then I saw it. A small envelope, cream-colored and aged around the edges. Written in purple marker, in clumsy, bubbly handwriting, were the words, "For Daddy on my wedding day." I sat down right there on the floor. My knees cracked and complained, but I didn't care. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was short. "Dear Daddy, when I get married someday, I want you to walk me down the aisle. I want you to hold my hand the whole way so I don't trip. You always make me feel safe. Love, Marla, age 12. I don't know how long I stared at that piece of paper. I didn't cry, at least not right away. I smiled, actually, that small, broken kind of smile that hurts your jaw more than your heart. Then came the sting in my eyes, the tightness in my chest. Back then, she used to make wedding binders, full of cutouts from magazines. I remember one page where she glued a photo of a bride next to a picture she'd drawn of me in a tux. "Me and Daddy," it said underneath. I whispered into the empty room. When did we drift so far? The letter folded back too easily, like it had been waiting in silence all these years. Beneath it, tucked in an old manila envelope, was something heavier, legal papers. One caught my eye right away. Power of attorney, draft only. My brow furrowed. I'd forgotten about this. Years ago, when Marla had that health scare during her sophomore year, appendicitis, I think, it scared her enough to bring up some legal talk. She'd asked me to help draft a document in case something ever happened to her. We never finished it. I remember now, she was going to sign it, but her stepfather said it was unnecessary, that she was an adult now and didn't need to tie herself to old family logistics. I didn't push. I should have. That was the first time I felt her slipping away, though I didn't realize it then. It wasn't a scream. It was a silence, 1,000 little silences. Did she stop trusting me? Or did someone teach her not to? I laid the draft flat on the table, next to the letter. Memories came back like snapshots. Me staying up with her through fevers, waiting outside school plays, baking birthday cakes from a box. I'd never missed a single parent-teacher conference. I began to stack more papers, report cards, drawings, Father's Day cards with handprints and glitter. Every piece screamed, "You were there. You mattered." But none of it changed where we stood now. Was it all forgotten or just rewritten? You don't lose your kids all at once. You lose them in pieces, a delayed call, a missed visit, a new voice they start listening to instead of yours. Then one day, you're not even on the guest list. I don't know what got into me, but I found a pen and legal pad and started writing. Not a letter, not a complaint, a plan. If they were going to erase me, I'd leave behind a version of myself that couldn't be rewritten, not out of revenge, out of clarity. I'd preserve what mattered, not just for me, but for truth's sake. Later that night, I sat back on the floor holding that letter again. My fingers traced the marker lines like they were braille. It hurt in ways I didn't know I could still feel. Then gently, I folded it up and placed it back in the envelope, back into the safe, not to hide it, to protect it. I turned to the calendar hanging by the fridge, grabbed a pen, and circled a date in the future. I don't know if she'd ever understand what she gave up, but I sure as hell was going to make sure I did. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel still. It felt like a place where something was about to begin. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted off here and there, but the safe, the letter, it kept replaying behind my eyelids like a slideshow on loop. So when the sun started bleeding in through the blinds, I gave up and made my way to the kitchen. That kitchen had seen the best parts of my life. Mornings used to start with little Marla perched on the counter, legs swinging like a metronome, rattling off whatever was on her mind. Math tests, TV shows, which kid had gum in their hair yesterday. I'd pretend to scold her for sitting on the counter, but she knew I liked having her close while I brewed the coffee. That routine carried us through years. Now, it felt like a stage after the actors had left, silent, hollow, and oddly echoey for such a small room. The coffee maker sputtered like it hadn't been used in months, though I knew I'd just made a pot the day before. I started mixing pancake batter out of habit. 2 eggs, splash of milk, whisk till smooth. Same way I did when she was 7. Only difference was, no one would be eating them today. Flipping the first pancake onto a plate, I realized I hadn't spoken a single word since yesterday afternoon. I stepped into the hallway to grab my phone from the charging dock. That's when I heard them. Voices. Low, but clear enough through the slightly open door of the guest bedroom. "You did the right thing," Howard said. His voice had that smug smoothness I never liked, the kind people mistake for confidence. Marla replied, soft but distinct. "I just didn't want a scene. You know how he gets emotional." Howard chuckled. "Yeah, fragile. Always walking around with his little stories like they matter. He had his time." "He wouldn't have fit in," she said. "It's better this way, for everyone." I stopped breathing for a second. They thought they were alone. They thought I couldn't hear them. That made it worse. It meant it was real. Howard's voice again, with a casual cruelty that made my stomach clench. "It was easy, really. Just frame the whole thing like you tried, but he made himself unreachable. People believe what they're told, especially when it's wrapped in sympathy." Then, laughter. Not the kind that's loud or evil, just normal. Like 2 people gossiping over brunch, and that somehow cut deeper. I walked back into the kitchen, sat down, and stared at the pancakes. They looked the same, smelled the same, tasted like ash. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't slap you in the face. It slides in quietly with a joke and a nod. Something said behind a door. A moment you weren't supposed to witness. It's not always the knife in your back that kills you. Sometimes it's the whisper you weren't meant to hear. I replayed every interaction I'd ever had with Howard. The polite corrections, the way he'd answer Marla's questions before I could, the little jokes that painted me as outdated or out of touch, I'd let them slide, because I thought that's what keeping the peace meant. Turns out I was just giving them room to rewrite me. History isn't always rewritten by the victors. Sometimes it's edited by those who marry in. I got up, opened the cutlery drawer, reached for a spoon, and there it was. A small note, yellowed from time. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Blocky, all caps, written in pink gel pen. "Don't forget to smile today, Dad." She must have left it when she was 10, maybe younger. I taped it there once to see it every morning before work. I held it in my hand like it was a relic. My chest tightened. Not from anger, from loss. That little girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who didn't see me as essential or even welcome. I almost crumpled the note, almost, but I didn't. Instead, I sat back down, poured another cup of coffee, and stared straight ahead. No TV, no music, just the soft hum of the fridge and my breathing. If I am fragile, it's because I let them hold the pieces. Not anymore. I opened my phone, scrolled through my contacts. My thumb hovered over her name for a second. Then I pressed delete. The name disappeared without sound. It was mid-morning when I finally pulled the box down from the attic. I had to use a step stool. My knees didn't like it, but I wasn't about to ask for help. Dust floated in the sunbeams like lazy memories. The cardboard was soft at the edges, yellowed by time and heat. The label said, in my handwriting, "Photos, Family." I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Top layer was harmless. Christmas cards, vacation snapshots, school portraits of Marla with missing teeth and hair bows bigger than her head. I smiled without meaning to. Then I reached the bottom. The wedding album rehearsal section. They must have mailed it accidentally, or maybe they didn't care if I saw it. I flipped through the pages slowly. White smiles. Friends. Extended family. Marla radiant in a dress I'd never seen in person. And then, there it was. A full-page photo. Marla standing at the center of the frame. Howard next to her, hand placed just right on her arm, her eyes looking up at him. Underneath, in fancy silver script, the words, "Father of the bride." No photo of me, just that text, like I never existed, like some placeholder was more appropriate than the man who raised her. I didn't drop the album. I didn't yell, but I felt cold, real cold, inside out cold. They erased me. That thought stuck in my throat like bone. I closed the album slowly, placed it beside me, and sat for a long time, eyes dry, hands still. After a while, I stood, moved to the old drawer in the study I hadn't opened in years, one of those deep ones that sticks halfway out. I yanked until it gave. Inside, I found what I didn't know I'd been looking for, an envelope marked "Family Expenses." It didn't look like much, just a standard yellow envelope, the kind I used to file tax stuff in. But inside, neatly folded and itemized, was a ledger. Not typed, handwritten, clean, organized. I started reading dates, amounts, transfers. From what were clearly my accounts, though labeled differently, some shell names I didn't recognize, and a few that tied back to accounts Howard managed on behalf of the family. Tens of thousands, all marked for Marla. Tuition gaps, summer internships, a car down payment, emergency dental, and not once, not a single time, was my name listed as the source. No note, no signature, not even a "from Dad." It was as if I had been a ghost bankrolling a life I no longer had a place in. I sat back, my chest didn't hurt. My head did. "I supported you." And you pretended I never existed. I whispered it like a confession, not just exclusion. This was identity theft of the soul, a slow erasure written in fine print and blank spaces. I stood up, walked into the hallway. The house was quiet, but the walls seemed louder than they used to be. Every photo frame I passed showed me smiling with her. Graduation, Father's Day, that trip to Colorado. Now those same frames felt like accusations. You knew, they seemed to say, but you didn't want to know. I placed my hand on the wall by the kitchen. That same wall used to reflect her laughter. Now, silence. Walls don't talk, people do, I muttered. But these walls had been listening. I went back to the study, cleared space on the desk, took out the ledger, a notepad, and my old file folders. I started grouping items, photos, receipts, notes, printouts, not to hoard, to organize, to preserve. I will make them see the truth, I said out loud, whether they want to or not. The old Tony would have gone quiet, let it go, maybe write a sad poem in the garage and disappear behind the lawn work. Not this time. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about reclamation. I didn't send any angry texts. I didn't pick up the phone and scream. Instead, I wrote to Clark, my lawyer. Need formal documentation of account ownership and financial transfers. Please confirm earliest appointment. Then I drafted an email to Howard. Short, neutral, not even accusatory. Howard, received copy of family ledger, noticed inconsistencies. Can you clarify source designations? Regards, Tony. No heat, no threat, just enough to make him squirm. Because here's the thing about foundations. When you remove the right beam, the whole house shifts. And I had just started pulling. I closed the ledger and sat back. The house was still quiet, but my mind loud. I heard about the dinner from Linda, the neighbor 2 doors down. She'd seen Marla's car pull up with balloons and catering boxes, heard laughter spilling out of the open garage. She asked me if I was headed over later. I wasn't invited. But I went. I showered, shaved, and wore the same blue shirt Marla once said made me look less like a retired engineer and more like a dad from a Hallmark movie. I brought a bottle of wine, nothing fancy, just something red, dry, polite. Her house sat like every other in that neighborhood, manicured, symmetrical, forgettable. I rang the bell. No one answered. So I opened the door. It wasn't locked. The smell of roasted chicken and candles filled the air. Voices, laughter, silverware tapping plates. I stepped in. Conversations hushed. Heads turned, briefly. No one spoke. Not a single, "Hi, Dad," or "Tony, what are you doing here?" Not even a fake smile. Just silence. I stood in that doorway a second longer than I should have, then moved in, slow and steady, like I belonged. Because I did. I pulled out the chair at the end of the long table, the same spot I always sat when she was little. Nobody told me to stop, but nobody said anything at all. I placed the wine gently on the table and sat down. Everyone kept eating. Someone asked for the salt. Someone else passed it. A fork clinked on a plate. It was like watching a play I wasn't cast in anymore. There are worse things than being yelled at, I thought. One of them is being nothing. A little boy, someone's kid, leaned over and whispered, "Who's he?" Marla, without even looking up, replied, "No one. He's just leaving." The words didn't slice. They crushed, like a slow press on the chest. The chair beside her remained empty. It used to be mine. I looked down at my plate. Salad untouched. I picked up a fork, took one bite. Lettuce and silence, both bitter. Somebody whispered, "This is uncomfortable." Marla nodded. I stood, raised my glass. To families who forget where they came from. Then I set it back down, walked out, quiet, no slammed door, no scene. The street was darker than I remembered. My car was colder than it should have been, but I drove home in silence, that kind of silence that hums under your skin. When I got back, I tossed my jacket on the chair. It felt heavier than usual. I reached into the pocket and pulled out a manila folder. Clark must have slipped it in when we spoke that morning. Said he'd follow up later. I never looked. Until now. Inside was a legal document. Signature, clean and certain. Marla had given Howard power of attorney. Weeks ago. Over assets tied to accounts I helped build. The date? 3 days after she told me she hadn't made up her mind yet. She lied. Not impulsively, not emotionally, strategically. I scanned the clauses. Language I had once taught her to question. Now used against me. Protective terms stripped away, rights reassigned. I wasn't losing this war. I had already lost it, quietly, while I was busy giving space and assuming the best. I wasn't even a player anymore. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. The dark glass showed someone older, smaller, tired. When you're invisible long enough, I said to no one, you start fading for real. I thought of Marla at 10, stubborn, sweet, wouldn't go to bed without a story. She used to wrap her tiny fingers around my pinky like it was a lifeline. I sank to the floor, back against the cabinets, legs pulled in, and I cried. Not the loud kind, not the kind you see in movies. Just tears that quietly soaked into a shirt no one would ever notice. Some heartbreaks don't echo, they hum, quiet and constant for years. I don't know how long I sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Eventually I stood up, wiped my face with the sleeve of that same blue shirt, walked to the desk and opened a drawer, pulled out a notebook, wrote one line. This ends with dignity, mine. Then I gathered what mattered. Old photographs, bank statements, the bedtime note she wrote me at 8, all of it into one box, labeled it Legacy. I placed it by the door. My plan had changed. I spent the morning sitting at the kitchen table, papers spread out like puzzle pieces that didn't belong together, until they did. Bank statements, years apart. Ledgers I once ignored. At first glance, they were nothing but lines and numbers, but patterns emerged, names repeated, sums moved, and not once did my name appear as a source. I looked closer. The years aligned too perfectly. Every family emergency Marla had called about. Every time I wrote checks to help her breathe easy. Those amounts matched deposits from shell entities tied to Howard. I whispered aloud. I funded her life, but I was never on the books. It wasn't just a financial erasure. It was personal. Like I was a donor, not a dad. A resource, not a presence. I leaned back in the chair, the kind of lean where breath gets stuck in your chest. No tears. Just the stillness of arithmetic betrayal. This wasn't about an invite anymore. It was about justice. Later that day, I was pouring a second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. The headline read, Daughter of retired architect opens up. My father left me behind. I froze. Clicked it. Marla, posing next to Howard in some tasteful lighting. Clean makeup, soft cardigan, the kind of look that says, I'm healing. She spoke in gentle tones, said I was distant, that I never quite connected, that I only showed love through checks and receipts. I stared at the screen. There it was, the public obituary of our relationship. I scrolled. Comments poured in. She's so brave. No child deserves to be abandoned. Typical boomer dad. Checks over hugs. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. My voice cracked, but no one was around to hear. They've turned my history into her narrative. Not an ounce of truth, not even a distorted version of it. Just fiction. PR, polished to look like pain. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at nothing. I wanted to reply, to defend, to scream, but I didn't. Clark's words rang in my head from weeks ago. The strongest responses aren't loud, they're prepared. So I sat, at the same desk where I helped Marla fill out her college applications, The same place I signed her first car payment. And I planned. I called Clark, told him to start compiling proof, emails, wire transfers, audio if needed. We looped in a digital forensics team. I opened old files, highlighted dates, attached screenshots. I wasn't rushing this. I wasn't reacting. I was building. I drafted a statement, not for sympathy, not for claps, just the truth, not bitter, not dramatic. It started with, I raised my daughter with everything I had. That story deserves to stand. The rest followed like stones laid one by one across a river, measured, calm, and heavy. We set a release time for Tuesday, mid-morning, right before lunch, when people read. When the statement went live, I didn't flinch. I poured myself a glass of red, opened the curtains, and watched daylight stretch across the floor. Messages came in. A few old friends, confused. Some surprised, a couple supportive. But there were still plenty who clung to her side. I scrolled the comments, not obsessively, but carefully. Some were cruel. Some accused me of gaslighting. Others said, maybe both sides are true. But one stuck with me. Funny how the quiet ones come with receipts. I smiled, barely. This isn't about applause, I muttered. It's about truth standing when the lies fade. I shut the laptop, walked to the safe, pulled out the old letter, Marla's handwriting, from when she still called me her hero. I ran my thumb over the ink, then retrieved the wristwatch I'd given her at graduation. Neither belonged to her anymore. That night, I laid out documents by year, photos, checks, records, each one a chapter of a life I lived, and they tried to erase. I whispered to the empty room, let history show who built it. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. Meeting with Clark tomorrow. We're not building a case, we're laying a foundation. The next morning, I walked into Clark's office just like any other Tuesday. Same coffee smell, same humming from the front desk. Familiar, steady. But as soon as I stepped into the conference room, I felt it. The air was tight. Clark stood behind his desk, fussing with papers that didn't need fussing. He didn't look me in the eye. Tony, he said, voice clipped, we might need to cut today short. Family thing came up. I nodded, forced a polite smile. Sure. Hope everything's okay. He gave that non-answer shrug people use when they're not ready to lie, but not ready to tell the truth either. We sat. I laid out my notes, started walking through the next steps of our case, but the rhythm was off. He wasn't taking notes, barely reacting, just nodding every few words. His mind wasn't in the room, or maybe his heart wasn't. That's when I knew. Something had shifted. I just didn't know what. Clark disappeared for nearly an hour during what should have been a 15-minute phone call. When he returned, his face was the color of old chalk. He held a manila folder like it weighed 100 pounds. Tony, he said softly, sliding it across to me, you need to see this. Inside were copies of property title deeds, our family home, the lake cabin, even the old rental we bought as a fixer-upper for Marla one Christmas. All of them updated, refiled, and my name nowhere. I flipped through page after page. My initials used to be on every one of these, alongside Darlene's. Not anymore. They'd quietly filed new documents transferring full ownership to her. Some were even backdated. Sloppy work, but legal enough to pass. My jaw tightened. This isn't an error. Clark didn't respond. I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. They erased me, like I never poured one drop of sweat into building that roof. He looked down at his shoes. They threatened me, Tony. Darlene called this morning, said if I didn't drop your case, she'd go public about my former law partner, the one who got disbarred, claimed I helped cover it up. I closed the folder and sat back, staring at the ceiling. Betrayal feels different when it comes from inside your own blood. But this was deeper. They were playing chess and I wasn't even on the board. I rubbed my temples. You can steal property, I said quietly, but you can't steal memory. Clark nodded, still shaken. He wasn't the enemy, not yet, just another man caught in someone else's power game. That night, I stood in my study for hours, couldn't sit, couldn't rest, just kept rereading the deeds, the stamps, the fake signatures. Every line screamed, "You don't matter anymore." I thought about backing off, thought maybe I was pushing too far, dragging old wounds into daylight. Then I remembered something from a plaque that used to hang in my old office. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the will to act while afraid. I walked to the filing cabinet, pulled out a letter, handwritten by Darlene from 2 decades ago. She'd thanked me, called me her silent foundation, said she never could have finished nursing school without my help. She'd written that before she found her new script. I held it, thought about using it, about fighting fire with fire. But something in me pulled back. If I sunk to their level, I wouldn't win. Even if I got everything back, I'd lose what mattered more, the part of me that still believed in truth. The box was still there, the legacy box. It felt heavier now, not from weight, but meaning. I added the deeds, the letter, a copy of the altered titles. I placed it all in order, like blueprints, not for destruction, for proof. Then I sat down and wrote a letter to Marla. Not angry, not pleading, just firm. I know what's been done, I know who I am, and I know where I stand. This fight isn't out of revenge, it's out of respect. For the truth, for what I built, and for the man I refuse to let you erase. I folded it, sealed it, slipped it into the box, locked it. When I looked in the mirror that night, I didn't see a man defeated. I saw a man who'd finally remembered what he was made of. I woke to my phone buzzing like it had something urgent to say. Messages, emails, notifications from people I hadn't heard from in years. I sat up, rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, and tapped on the first alert, a video. Already 500,000 views. I didn't post it. Didn't know who did. But the second I saw it, my breath stopped. It was Marla. Backstage, off camera, before her interview, she was laughing. Not cruelly, but casually, like none of it mattered. Her voice was clear, careless. Of course he supported me. I mean, emotionally, he's a rock, but it just doesn't sell. The person filming asked something I couldn't hear. Marla replied, "Come on. No one clicks on 'my dad did his best.' That's not a headline." Then she adjusted her mic, smiled, and walked out to give that polished speech about abandonment. I watched it twice, then again, not out of shock. No, that had dried up weeks ago. But because for the first time, the wind was shifting. People weren't just reposting the clip, they were talking, debating, doubting. For months, her voice drowned mine, but now it was my turn. I sat at the kitchen table, phone still glowing in my hand, and whispered to no one, "When your story's been stolen, you take it back one frame at a time." Later that afternoon, I checked my mail. Junk flyers, a bill, and one envelope. No return address. Familiar handwriting, though. I didn't even need to open it to know. It was from her. From Sharon, my ex-wife. I stood there for a minute, then walked to the study, sat at my desk, and opened it slowly, like unwrapping something fragile. She wrote, "Tony, I saw the headlines. I saw what our daughter said, and I can't stay quiet anymore. I remember everything. I remember the nights you drove her to choir practice after work, even when your back hurt. I remember the time you sold your tools to pay for her braces. I found her letters, Tony. The ones she wrote you but never sent. I saw how much she needed you, how much you gave. I know you never stopped trying, and I want you to know, I never stopped seeing it." I leaned back, the letter resting in my lap, eyes stinging. It wasn't long, maybe a page, but it said what I needed. Not for the world, but for me. It confirmed what I'd held on to in silence. I hadn't imagined it. I wasn't rewriting history. I had simply lived it, quietly, fully, and now, finally seen. I pulled open the legacy box, placed her letter next to the one Marla wrote as a child, crayon handwriting, crooked lines, spelling mistakes. The two letters didn't cancel each other. They amplified each other. One from before the world got complicated. One from after it fell apart. That night, I called Clark. "I'm updating the will," I said. He didn't ask why. In his office the next morning, I sat across from him, pen in hand. "Marla," I said, "gets $1, not for punishment. For punctuation." Clark looked at me. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "It's not about money. It's about message. I won't be erased. I won't pretend." He passed me the papers. I signed them slowly, intentionally. Each stroke of ink felt like a truth being written in stone. Afterward, I placed the signed copy into the box, right next to Sharon's letter. A box full of facts. Not bitterness, just proof. I didn't smile, but I breathed, and that was enough. By late afternoon, the video had reached the local news cycle. Not just gossip sites, but actual journalism. Independent bloggers were pulling apart Marla's interview, matching dates, digging through old articles. Even neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years started commenting publicly. "I remember Tony fixing their porch," one said. "He was always there." Marla posted a statement later that day, full of spin, taken out of context, misunderstood humor. But something was different now. She was reacting, not controlling. I watched her words roll out online like a tide receding, loud at first but fading fast. I didn't say much that evening. I didn't need to. In the silence, I felt the tide turning, not like a victory parade, but like steady ground under a once sinking foundation. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table, placed both letters side by side. Childhood, adulthood, both pointing to the same truth. I looked at them quietly, then leaned back and whispered, "Today, I was heard." And for the first time in a long while, I closed my eyes without holding my breath. I agreed to meet her, one last time, not to fix anything, not to argue, just to close the door properly without slamming it. We met at a park, halfway between both our homes, public enough to stay calm, neutral enough not to carry history on its benches. She was already sitting when I got there, hands folded in her lap like a student waiting for a teacher. "Dad," she started, standing up. "Thank you for meeting me." I nodded but didn't shake her hand. Not out of coldness, just some things didn't feel right anymore. She spoke like someone rehearsing, each line polished, every pause calculated. Apologies crafted to sound honest but land safely. I let her finish. "I made mistakes," she said. "I didn't know how to handle all of it, the pressure, the media. I'm sorry if it hurt you." I looked at her, really looked. My daughter, still beautiful, still sharp. But the distance between us wasn't just physical. It was made of years, of silence, assumptions, stories told to fit someone else's rhythm. "I'm not angry," I said, "but I'm not blind either." She bit her lip, nodded slightly. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying," she whispered. "I know. That's why I'm here." I told her calmly. The inheritance, what was left of it, was no longer in the family pot. I didn't say it to hurt her. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because what mattered more than blood, more than money, was the principle. "I've put it into a foundation," I said, "named after my father. For men who've walked the path I walked, quietly, without applause." She blinked, stunned. Maybe she expected me to threaten or beg for understanding. Instead, I gave her something she didn't expect: boundaries wrapped in dignity. "Some walls," I said, "aren't meant to keep people out. They're built to keep your integrity in. The conversation ended not with anger, but a silence that meant, this chapter is done. We stood. She walked one way, I walked the other. I didn't look back. A few days later, I sat with Clark at his office. The donation papers were spread out in front of me. Simple language, clear intent. The foundation would fund scholarships for single dads and care initiatives for elderly men often left behind. I signed slowly, knowing no one could unsign it. I named it after my father, I said, almost to myself. Clark nodded. He'd be proud. I'm not doing it for pride, I said. I'm doing it because some men die without ever being remembered. I won't let him be one of them. He slid the final page into the file. With that, the money, what was fought over, lied about, leveraged, became something else, something clean. And I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace, not joy, just quiet peace. The next morning, I drove out to the cemetery. I brought the childhood letter, still folded, still creased from all those years ago. I stood at her grave, my wife's, the one who had watched all this unfold without being able to say a word. I thought I needed justice, I said aloud. But really, I just needed to know I wasn't crazy. I placed the letter gently near the headstone, not for her, for me, for the memory of who we were when all of this was still love and hope and late-night cereal talks. She made her choice, I whispered. So did I. The wind moved through the trees, nothing dramatic, just a soft gust. I sat on the bench nearby, no tears, just stillness. Sometimes the strongest goodbye is the one you give yourself. That evening I returned home and started packing up the past, not to erase it, but to make room for what's next. Old photos, news clippings, bitter reminders, into a box. The legacy box stayed. The letters stayed. A few pictures stayed. Everything else, gone. I wrote a short line on a piece of paper and framed it by the front door. Truth doesn't need to shout. And for the first time in months, I stepped outside not to escape something, but to return to something. I picked up the rake and started clearing the garden beds. Weeds had taken over, but the soil was still good underneath. A neighbor passed by. Hey, Tony, looking good out there. I smiled. Real this time. Raised my hand and waved. Thanks, I called back, trying to get back to it. He nodded, kept walking. The sun started dipping behind the houses. I stood there, fingers in the dirt, and felt something settle in me. Not an ending, not quite a new beginning, just roots finding their way home.